She was invisible to him until jealousy made the mafia boss lose control. The alarm was a digital scream in the 4:30 a.m. darkness. Lucia Romero's hand shot out, slapping the plastic clock on her nightstand into silence. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of her own breathing and the rumble of a sanitation truck 2 streets over. Then, the cold seeped in. The thin blanket wasn't enough, and the floorboards of her tiny studio apartment felt like sheets of ice against the soles of her feet. She rose, muscles aching from the night before, and pulled her hair back into a tight, severe bun. This was the first shift. The cafe. Later, there would be the second shift, the bar. 2 jobs, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It was the only way to keep her head above the tide of debt her father had left when he died. He had been a good man, she reminded herself, just not a smart one with money. And the men he owed were not the forgiving type. An hour later, she was on the bus, watching the gray, sleeping city slide by. She worked at the Gilded Bean, a high-end cafe nestled in the lobby of one of the city's most imposing granite skyscrapers. The building, like the cafe itself, was owned by Caruso Holdings, and every morning, Dominic Caruso came in. He arrived at precisely 7:05, just as the morning rush was beginning to swell. The air in the cafe would change the moment he pushed through the glass doors. Laughter would quiet, chatter would hush. He moved with a heavy, silent grace that demanded space, flanked always by 2 men who looked carved from the same granite as the building. His suits were dark, impossibly well-tailored, his black hair brushed back from a face that was all hard angles and cold discipline. He was, Lucia knew, her most intimidating regular. He was also the man who signed the paychecks, though she doubted he was aware of it. "Morning, Mr. Caruso, the usual?" she would ask. He would only nod, sliding a $50 bill across the counter. He never waited for the change. His order was always the same, a large black coffee, no room for cream, no sugar, and he would take the cup, his fingers brushing hers for less than a second, a touch that felt like static electricity, and retreat to a small table in the far corner. He would sit there for exactly 20 minutes, reading a physical newspaper, his expression unreadable, before disappearing back into the private elevator that led to the penthouse levels. He never spoke more than that single, dismissive nod. He never looked at her. Not really. Lucia was just the hands that delivered the coffee. "You're staring at the prince again." Lucia, Maria, her co-worker, murmured as she wiped down the espresso machine. Maria was a decade older, with kind eyes and an awareness of the world that Lucia lacked. "I am not," Lucia whispered back, her face heating. She hated that she blushed so easily. "It's okay to look." "He's a handsome man," Maria sighed, glancing over her shoulder at his corner table. "But he is a cold one, a mafia prince. That's what they call him. Those men are built from shadows and secrets, better to admire from far away. Very far." Lucia brushed it off, turning to organize the pastry case with unnecessary focus. She wasn't an idiot. She knew who Dominic Caruso was. Everyone in the city knew. He was the head of the Caruso family, a name that was spoken in whispers, associated with shipping, real estate, and a long, dark history of violence. He was untouchable, mysterious, and utterly removed from her world of bus rides and looming interest payments. Her fascination wasn't romantic. It was the morbid curiosity of a mouse studying a hawk. That night, the second job felt longer than usual. She worked at a noisy tavern on the east side, a place that smelled of stale beer and fried food. The tips were better, but the customers were rougher. When her shift ended at 1 in the morning, the streets were empty and slick with a light, freezing drizzle. She couldn't afford a cab, not if she wanted to make the payment that was due at the end of the week. The walk to her apartment was 12 blocks through a neighborhood that decent people avoided after dark. She clutched the strap of her bag, pushing her keys between her fingers to make a clumsy, desperate weapon. The sound of her own worn sneakers on the wet pavement echoed off the brick buildings, sounding too loud in the silence. She was 3 blocks from home when she heard the other footsteps, heavy and uneven. Hey, waitress!" Lucia's blood turned to ice. She didn't look back. She walked faster. "I saw you watching me tonight," the voice slurred. Closer now. "You want some company? That it?" She recognized him. A drunk customer from the bar. A man with watery eyes and a possessive stare who had tried to corner her by the kitchen twice. She broke into a run, but he was faster. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around and slamming her back against the graffiti-covered wall of an alley. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. "Let go of me," she gasped, striking out with her free hand. He laughed, a wet, rattling sound, and grabbed her other wrist, pinning her easily. The smell of cheap whiskey washed over her, thick and suffocating. "Playing hard to get. I like that." He pressed his body against hers. "You've been serving me all night. Time to serve me." Panic, pure and blinding, seized her. She opened her mouth to scream, but just as her breath drew in, the alley was flooded with blinding white light. A long, black sedan had pulled up to the curb, its engine an almost imperceptible hum. It was sleek and menacing, looking completely alien on the trash-strewn street. Before the drunk could even turn, 2 doors opened. 2 large men in dark suits emerged. They didn't run. They moved with a terrifying, economical purpose. The drunk, confused, let go of Lucia's wrist to raise his hands. "Hey, man, this ain't your business." One of the men grabbed the drunk by the throat, silencing him. The other one hit him. A short, brutal strike to the stomach that made the man fold. They dragged him away from Lucia as if he were a sack of garbage. Then, the rear door of the sedan opened. Dominic Caruso stepped out. He wasn't wearing the pristine suit from the morning. He was in a dark gray shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and a black overcoat that seemed to drink the meager light from the street lamp. He looked taller here, in the dark, more dangerous. His eyes scanned the scene. He looked at the drunk, who was now being held against the car, choking. He looked at the 2 men who stood waiting for a command. Then his gaze landed on Lucia. She was pressed against the wall, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her bag was on the ground, its contents spilled. Dominic walked toward her, his expensive leather shoes silent on the wet pavement. He stopped a few feet away. His face was a cold mask, but his eyes, dark and intense, were focused entirely on her. She realized, with a jolt, that this was the first time he had ever truly looked at her. "You work in my building," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that cut straight through the night air. It was not a question. Lucia could only nod, her throat tight with fear. "You're under my protection." He looked at her for another long second, his gaze tracing the outline of her face, the tremor in her lip. He gestured to the open door of the sedan. "Get in. We'll take you home." The offer hung in the air. Safety, warmth, a ride away from this nightmare. But as the adrenaline faded, something else rose in its place, a fierce, defiant pride. She had been paying off one man's debts, trapped by her father's obligations. She would not become obligated to another, especially not this one. "No," she said. The word was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the alley, it sounded like a gunshot. One of his men turned his head, his expression shocked. Dominic Caruso's face, however, merely tightened, a flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, passed through his eyes. "No," Lucia said again, louder this time. She pushed herself off the wall, bending to scoop her spilled belongings back into her bag. Her hands were still shaking. "Thank you, but no, I don't want your help." "Don't be foolish," Dominic said, his voice hardening. "This neighborhood isn't safe." "I know," she snapped, zipping the bag with a sharp, angry pull. "I live here. I don't want to owe anyone, especially not a mafia boss." She hadn't meant to say the last part aloud. The words hung between them, reckless and dangerous. The 2 bodyguards tensed. Dominic's expression remained cold, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. He studied her, this small, drenched, defiant woman who looked like she might break, yet had just refused him to his face. Lucia didn't wait to be dismissed. She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his expensive overcoat, and walked out of the alley. She did not run, though every instinct screamed at her to... She walked, fast and rigid down the dark street, expecting at any second to hear his footsteps behind her, to feel a hand on her shoulder. But nothing came. She rounded the corner, fumbled for her keys, and finally locked herself inside her apartment, collapsing against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dominic stood in the rain for a long time, watching the empty space where she had disappeared. He was unsettled. He was used to people obeying him, fearing him, or begging him for favors. He was not used to being rejected. He was not used to this strange, unwelcome pull of interest. She was terrified. Yet she had chosen the dangerous street over his car. He turned to his right-hand man, the one pinning the now sobbing drunk. "Find out where she lives," Dominic ordered, his voice flat, "and get rid of that trash." The next day, Lucia went to the cafe on autopilot. She was jumpy, spilling coffee grounds, her eyes darting to the door every time the bell rang. When Dominic Caruso walked in at 7:05, she nearly dropped a tray of cups. He did not acknowledge the night before. He ordered his black coffee. He slid the 50 across the counter. He nodded, but as he took the cup, his eyes met hers, and they held for 3 solid seconds. It was a look of cold assessment, a weighing and measuring that made her feel completely exposed. Then he turned and went to his table. The call came during her lunch break. It was her landlord, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson. "Miss Romero," he stammered, "there's been a change of, ownership with your lease. It's been terminated." Lucia's stomach dropped. "What? You can't?" "I have until the 1st. No, you don't understand," Henderson rushed to say. "It's been bought out. You're being moved. An apartment has been secured for you at the Astoria building, uptown." "The Astoria? I can't afford that." "It's paid for. Miss, the first 6 months are covered. A moving van will be at your building at 5 p.m. "Who paid for it?" Lucia demanded, though she already knew the answer. I'm not at liberty to say. The paperwork is all anonymous, handled by a trust." "I refuse," Lucia said. "I'm not moving." "Miss," the landlord's voice cracked with fear, "I strongly suggest you reconsider. The people who arranged this, they are not people you say no to." She hung up, furious. He was controlling her, buying her, putting her in a golden cage just because she worked in his building. She worked her entire shift in a cold rage. But that night, walking home from the tavern, things felt different. The close call she had dismissed as bad luck now felt like a prelude. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. A car, a simple sedan, slowed as it passed her, and she nearly dove into the street. It was just a lost driver. But the panic was real. When she got to her apartment, she saw that the lock on her building's front door was broken. It had been broken for a week. But tonight, it looked like a gaping wound. She stood in her small, cold room. She was tired. She was bone tired of being scared. She hated him for doing it. She hated that he had the power to simply move her life around like a chess piece. But she also knew she would sleep better at the Astoria. Reluctantly, shamefully, she packed her few belongings. The new apartment was beautiful. It was on the 12th floor, with a doorman in the lobby and a view of the city lights. It was warm. It had a deadbolt that actually worked. She began to settle into the new routine. The bus ride was shorter, the neighborhood was safe. But she wasn't free. She started to sense his presence, even when he wasn't there. A discreet black car would be parked across the street from the Astoria when she left in the morning. A man she didn't recognize would be reading a newspaper in the lobby of the cafe, his eyes never seeming to lift from the page, yet she knew he was watching her. And at the cafe, Dominic's routine changed. He still came in at 7:05. He still ordered his black coffee, but now he stayed for 30 minutes, not 20, and every time she passed his table, she could feel his gaze on her, a heavy, possessive weight. She was unnerved, feeling like a bird trapped in a cage she hadn't yet realized was locked, and deep down, in a place she refused to examine, a small, treacherous part of her was inexplicably flattered. He saw her. After all this time. Dominic Caruso finally saw her. His visits became erratic, and in doing so, more predictable. Dominic Caruso no longer arrived at 7:05. He might appear at 9, when the morning rush had ebbed, or at 11:30, just before the lunch crush, sometimes. He came twice. His 20-minute ritual stretched to 40, then to an hour. He didn't just sit in his corner. He sat at the bar, directly in her line of sight, and he talked. "The rain is supposed to be heavy tonight," he said one afternoon, his voice a low rumble that cut through the hiss of the steam wand. Lucia, her hands tight on a steaming cup, only nodded. "Yes, Mr. Caruso. You should take a car, not the bus." Her shoulders tensed. "I'll be fine. Mr. Caruso." He watched her, his dark eyes intense, unblinking. He was no longer the invisible force in the corner. He was a physical presence, a weight in the air she had to push against with every step. Her coworkers noticed. Maria gave her sympathetic, worried looks, but said nothing. Lucia remained guarded, her politeness a shield. She kept her answers to one word. She focused on wiping counters that were already clean. She refused to meet that demanding gaze. This, she knew, this feeling, she had felt it before, years ago, with Ricardo, who had a quick smile and hands that were gentle, until they were not. He had taken care of her, too. He'd protected her by checking her phone, by telling her the red dress was too much, by waiting outside her classes. He had loved her, he said, but his love felt like a shrinking room. He had wanted to own her, and she had almost let him. She had spent 2 years disentangling herself from that slow, suffocating kindness. She had sworn, in the cold, empty apartment she'd fled to, that she would never, ever be owned again. And now, here was Dominic Caruso. He was not kind. He was not smiling. He was 1,000 times more magnetic and 1,000,000 times more dangerous. His interest felt like a brand, a heavy, hot claim she had not consented to. The safe apartment, the watchful car, the small talk at the bar. It was the same pattern, a different kind of cage, but a cage all the same. A week later, in the glass and steel penthouse that overlooked the city, Dominic's right-hand man, Vince, placed a thin file on his desk. "The girl," Vince said, his voice flat. "Lucia Romero. We looked into the debt, as you asked." Dominic didn't look up from the financial reports he was signing. "And? It's not a bank loan. Her father owed the Moretti crew. She's been paying the interest for a year. The principal is just over $80,000. Dominic's pen stopped. A drop of black ink pooled on the paper. The Morettis, his most volatile and unpredictable rivals, a snake in his garden, a hook in a woman who worked in his building, a woman he had designated. "They have her on a short leash, boss," Vince continued. "The interest rate is criminal. She'll never pay it off. They own her." Dominic's jaw tightened. The word own settled in the air like poison. He closed the file. He thought of her in that dark alley, shaking but defiant. He thought of her refusing his car, refusing his help, her pride a sliver of glass, and the Morettis thought they could hold that over her. "Settle it," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that lethal quiet. Vince raised an eyebrow. "Settle it, boss. That's giving the Morettis 80 grand. It's settle it in cash, today, and make it clear to Gino Moretti that if he or any of his men so much as look at the street she lives on, I will burn his entire operation to the ground." Dominic finally looked up, his eyes like chips of ice. "And Vince, she doesn't find out. Not from you. Not from anyone. It's done. It's erased." That evening, Lucia sat at her small kitchen table in the Astoria apartment. It was the first of the month, payment day. She nursed a cup of tea, her stomach in knots, and opened her laptop. She logged into the predatory lender's unstable website, the one she dreaded visiting. She navigated to the payment portal, steeling herself for the familiar, sickening subtraction from her meager savings. Account balance, $0. Account status, paid in full. Lucia stared at the screen. 0. It was impossible. She refreshed the page. The green banner was still there, paid in full. Her first thought was not relief. It was a cold, sharp spike of panic. This was a mistake, a terrible, costly mistake that would bring men to her door. She fumbled for her phone. dialing the collections number she knew by heart. A gruff man answered on the second ring. "Yeah? My name is Lucia Romero. I'm calling about my account," she said, her voice shaking. "There's a mistake. It says it's paid, but I didn't—" "Romero," the man grunted. She heard him typing. "Yeah, Romero. Account's closed." "Closed? But who paid it? I didn't authorize—" "Look, lady," the man said, his voice full of sudden, forced patience. "Some trust paid it off. Anonymous benefactor. The full $82,450. It's done. You're clear. Congratulations. Have a nice life." The line clicked dead. Lucia sat in the silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. Anonymous benefactor. The words mocked her. There was nothing anonymous about this. There was only one person in her life with that kind of power, that kind of money, and that kind of terrifying, controlling interest. The apartment wasn't a gift. It was a down payment. The debt wasn't erased. It was transferred. He hadn't just bought her apartment. He had bought her. She didn't wait. She didn't change out of her sweatpants. She grabbed her keys, stormed out of the apartment, and rode the elevator down. Her fury a hot, metallic taste in her mouth. She marched the 6 blocks to the Gilded Bean, the cold November wind whipping her hair into her face. It was 10 p.m. The cafe was dark, the chairs stacked on the tables, but she knew. She saw the black sedan parked across the street, the one that was always there, idling. She pounded on the glass door. A moment later, Maria, who was mopping, appeared from the back, a look of surprise on her face. "Lucia, we are closed. Is he here?" Lucia demanded, her voice hoarse. Maria's eyes widened, looking over her shoulder. From the dark corridor that led to the building's private lobby, Dominic Caruso emerged. He was in his shirt sleeves, no tie, holding a stack of papers. He saw her, her wild hair, her fists clenched. He paused, his expression unreadable. He looked at Maria. "It's fine. Maria, you can go home. I'll lock up." Maria, visibly relieved, grabbed her coat and scurried out, shooting Lucia a look of profound pity. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the vast, dark cafe. The only light came from the orange glow of the street lamps outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee grounds and rain. "You paid it," Lucia said. It wasn't a question. Dominic didn't move. He stood by the counter, a silhouette of power. "It was a problem. I dealt with it." "A problem," she repeated, her voice rising, echoing in the empty space. "It was my problem, Mr. Caruso. My debt. My father's mess. Mine. You had no right." "The Morettis are my rivals," he said, his voice a low, hard edge. "You were working in my building. You were a liability I could not afford." The clinical, cold nature of his words struck her like a slap. "A liability? That's all I am to you? A loose end to tie up?" She stalked closer, fueled by a recklessness she didn't recognize. "Or am I just something you can buy? First the apartment, now this. You think you can just buy me? Put me in a safe little box where I'm no longer a liability?" She was close enough now to see the muscle jump in his jaw. "I am not your property," she spat. "I am not one of your buildings." She ripped the spare key to her cafe locker from her keychain and threw it on the counter. It skidded across the granite with a sharp, metallic sound. "I quit. You don't get to buy me." He was silent. He looked at the key, then at her. She expected him to be angry, to yell, to be as cold as he'd been in the lobby. But when he spoke, his voice was different. It was rough, lower, and held a note of something she couldn't place. "I don't want to buy you. Lucia." He moved, stepping out from behind the counter. He was in front of her before she could react, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I just want you safe," he murmured. She let out a bitter, shaky laugh. "Safe? You don't even know me. You don't know anything about me. I see you." The words stopped her breath. "What? I see you," he repeated, his voice vibrating through her. "I always have." He took a step closer, and she took an involuntary step back, her legs hitting the leg of a table. He had her cornered. "I've seen you," he whispered. "Every morning for 2 years. I saw you counting your tips, your brow furrowed, wondering how you'd make it. I saw you give your own sandwich to that old woman, Mrs. Petrova, who comes in just to get warm. I saw you smile at her, a real smile, and I saw how tired you were the moment she turned away. I see you." The air was gone from the room. He was wrong. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a story he'd invented. But his gaze was so intense, so certain. It felt like he was peeling her skin back. It had started to rain, a hard, driving rain that lashed against the windows, isolating them in their own dark, pressurized world. He lifted his hand. It was a slow, deliberate movement. She flinched. His hand stopped, inches from her face. He held it there, steady, waiting for her to stop shaking. Then, impossibly gentle, his thumb brushed a strand of rain-dampened hair from her cheek. "I am not Ricardo," he murmured, and her blood ran cold. He knew? How could he know? He leaned in, and she was trapped, pinned by his gaze and the sheer weight of his presence. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was slow, yes, but it was burning. It was restrained, but the restraint was that of a man holding back a force of nature. It was a kiss of pure, contained hunger. It was possessive. It was a brand. It tasted of dark coffee, expensive whiskey, and the storm outside. His other hand found her waist, fingers gripping her hip, pulling her flush against him. Lucia's world tilted, her body, the traitor, melted, her hands, of their own accord, gripped the front of his shirt to keep from falling. She kissed him back, a second of pure, mindless surrender, drowning in the heat, and that's what terrified her. She gasped, tearing her mouth from his. "No." She shoved at his chest, a pathetic gesture against a man made of granite, but he let her go. He stepped back, his chest rising and falling, his eyes black in the dim light. His lips were wet, his expression shattered. "No," she said again, her voice a sob. She was overwhelmed by the heat, by the control he'd taken, by the fact that she had, for 1 second, let him. She felt the walls of the cage slamming shut. She turned and ran. She fumbled with the lock on the door and burst out into the night, the cold rain hitting her like a physical blow. She ran all the way back to the Astoria, not stopping, not looking back. Lucia began dating Mark from apartment 12B a week later. She hadn't quit. She couldn't. She needed the job. So she'd gone back to the cafe, her face pale, and simply not spoken to Dominic. She'd put his coffee on the counter and walked away. He had come in every day, his eyes burning holes in her back, the silence between them louder than any argument. Mark was an architect. He was blonde. He smiled, easily and often. He was kind, quiet, and normal. He held the elevator, talked about zoning laws, and asked her to a movie. Lucia said yes. She said yes to prove to herself that she could. She said yes because Mark was safe. He was the antithesis of the dark, suffocating power she had run from in the rain. He walked her home, their hands brushing. He was a perfect gentleman. As they entered the grand marble lobby of the Astoria, laughing at a joke he'd made, Lucia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was possible. A normal life. Then she saw him. Dominic was standing by the doorman's desk, dressed in a black suit that looked like it was sewn from shadows. He was not looking at them. He was ostensibly talking to the doorman. But his presence sucked all the air and warmth from the cavernous room. Mark, oblivious, touched her elbow. "So, next Friday, we could try that new Italian place." Dominic turned. His head moved slowly, his gaze locking onto Mark's hand on her arm. Lucia froze. Dominic's cold mask did not just crack, it shattered. It was not a grand, dramatic gesture. It was a sudden, violent stillness, a tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes, and the coldness was gone, replaced by a heat that was visible, a raw, unfiltered fury that promised violence. His gaze lifted, bypassing Mark entirely, and slammed into hers. "Lucia?" Mark asked, his smile faltering. He felt the change in temperature. "Everything okay? You know this guy?" Lucia's throat was dry. He owns the building." She pulled her arm from Mark's grasp. "Good night, Mr. Caruso." Dominic did not acknowledge her. He looked only at Mark, a look of such utter dismissal it was an insult in itself. Then he moved. He walked past them toward the private elevator, and he didn't stop. But as he passed Lucia, he leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper meant only for her. "He won't protect you like I will." The elevator doors opened, and he was gone. Lucia stood in the lobby, shaken to her core. "What a jerk," Mark said, trying to recapture the mood. "Intense guy. You okay?" She nodded, unable to speak, and fled to her apartment. She locked the deadbolt, leaning against the solid wood, her heart hammering. She was angry. She was terrified. And, to her deepest shame, she was thrilled. She hated him for it. She hated herself for it. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the city lights painting patterns on the walls. She could not stop thinking. She thought about his touch, the bruising, soft pressure of his lips. She thought about the look in his eyes in the lobby, that raw, possessive, dangerous jealousy. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Mark. "Hey, just checking in. Didn't like that guy in the lobby. Seemed intense. Just want to make sure you're okay." She smiled. He was sweet. Another text buzzed a minute later. "You should probably not talk to him. He seems like a bad influence." Lucia's smile faded. She stared at the words. "You should probably not talk to him." It was a kind comment, a quiet comment, a comment from a safe, normal man who was just looking out for her. But the echo of it was unmistakable. Dominic's jealousy was a raging wildfire, threatening to burn down everything. Mark's was a quiet, creeping vine, trying to tell her which way to grow. She turned the phone off, realizing with a sinking, cold dread that she wasn't trapped between one man and her freedom. She was trapped between two different kinds of cages. It did not end well with Mark. They had gone out twice more. Twice more. He had made quiet, needling comments. He'd ask who she was texting, though it was only Maria. He'd suggest she get home earlier from her night shift, as if he had a say in her hours. He was kind, but his kindness was a wrapper for a familiar, petty control. The end came on a Tuesday night, standing outside her apartment door. He had been trying to kiss her, and she had turned her head. "What's wrong?" he asked, his smile vanishing. "It's him, isn't it?" "It's not. It's just—" Lucia fumbled, trying to be gentle. "Mark, I just don't think this is working." "Not working, or you'd rather be with him?" His voice rose, losing its softness, gaining a whining, accusatory edge. "That guy in the lobby? The one who looks at you like he wants to eat you? Is that what you're into? Lucia, you like the danger?" "That's not fair," she said, her own anger rising. "Isn't it? I see the way you look when he's around. You're terrified, but you're into it. You're still into your mobster." The word mobster echoed in the hallway. Ugly and cheap. It made her feel dirty. It made her feel exposed, and in that moment, she realized Mark wasn't jealous of Dominic. He was jealous of the size of the emotion. He was small, and he knew it. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice shaking. "Yeah, you go," he called after her as she unlocked her door. "Go wait for him. But guys like that don't want women like you. They just want to break their toys." She slammed the door, his words hitting her like stones. She sagged against the wood, tears of pure, hot frustration rolling down her cheeks. She wasn't crying for Mark. She was crying because he was right, at least about the last part. She was crying because she had tried so hard to find a normal, safe path, and it had led her right back to this. She was trapped. She was still wiping her eyes, standing in the middle of her living room, when there was a knock. It was not a light, polite knock. It was too heavy, solid, certain raps on the door. Her blood went cold. She knew, with absolute certainty, who it was. He must have been watching. He must have seen Mark leave. "Go away," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. He knocked again, just twice. Patient, inevitable. She walked to the door, her heart hammering. She looked through the peephole. Dominic Caruso stood in the hallway, his face a mask of cold neutrality. He was in a black overcoat, his shoulders filling the tiny lens. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking down the hall, as if ensuring Mark was truly gone. Then, he looked directly into the peephole, his dark eyes pinning her. She opened the door. He stood there for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over her. He saw her tear-streaked cheeks, her red-rimmed eyes, the defiant set of her jaw. "He's wrong," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble. "It's none of your business," she said. But her voice had no strength. She was too tired to fight. "He put his hands on you?" The question was flat, cold, and held the promise of swift, terrible violence. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, he yelled." Dominic's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. He looked past her, into the warmth of her apartment. "May I come in?" It was the first time he had ever asked. He had given her the apartment. He had paid her debt. He had kissed her, but he had never asked for entry. The simple courtesy of it disarmed her more than any demand would have. She stepped aside. He walked in, and the apartment, which had always felt spacious, suddenly shrank. He filled it. He brought the scent of the cold night air, of expensive wool, and something uniquely his, a dark, masculine scent of clean soap and power. He didn't sit. He stood by her window, looking down at the river of lights from the city traffic. "I didn't mean to—" Lucia started, then stopped. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You were trying to live a normal life," he said, turning to face her. "With a normal man." He said the word normal as if it were a foreign, distasteful object. "And you're here to tell me I can't," she said, her voice bitter. "I'm here," he said, moving closer, "because you were crying." His proximity was suffocating. She wanted to back away, but she was already against the arm of her sofa. "Why do you care?" she whispered, the question she'd been afraid to ask. "Why are you doing this? You've paid my debt. You gave me this place. You've won. I'm your liability. All safe and sound." His eyes hardened. "Do you really think that's what this is? I don't know what it is. You won't leave me alone. But you won't. You're just there, watching." He was silent for a long time, studying her. The vulnerability of the last 10 minutes, the tears and the exhaustion, had left her open, her defenses down. "When I was 14, he said, his voice quiet. "My father took me to a warehouse. He wanted to show me what happens when someone steals from the family. He made me watch. He didn't blink. His gaze was fixed on hers, holding her captive. He handed me a gun afterward and told me that a man who cannot protect his family is not a man. He told me that feeling nothing is a strength." Lucia's breath caught. She saw a flicker of that 14-year-old boy in his hard, adult eyes. "I have spent 20 years, he continued, his voice a low, rough confession. "Building walls, I built them out of stone and steel and silence. I learned to feel nothing. I learned to be the man he wanted, cold, in control." He took the final step, standing directly in front of her, and then I'd go get coffee, and I'd see this girl, with tired eyes and a spine made of iron, who gave away her own lunch, and every day, watching you. "You put a crack in those walls. Dominic," she breathed, his name a plea. "I'm not a good man. Lucia, I am everything you should run from." He lifted his hand, his knuckles brushing her cheek, where her tears had dried. "But that normal, safe man, he will never see you. Not really. He will only try to dim your light." The tension in the room was a living thing. It was a wire, pulled taut, humming with a frequency that vibrated in her bones. The air was too thick, too hot. His confession hung between them, a raw, exposed nerve. "I've wanted you," he whispered, his voice going rough with an emotion he'd held back for so long. "For years, from the first day you argued with a customer about a refund. I've wanted you." That was it. The wire snapped. He didn't crash into her. He moved with a deliberate, desperate intent. His hand slid from her cheek to her jaw, his fingers tangling in the hair near her ear, tilting her head back. His other arm snaked around her waist, pulling her from the sofa, hard against his chest. She stumbled, her hands landing on the solid muscle of his shirt front. She trembled, her fingers gripping the fine cotton. "Don't," she breathed, but it was a lie. "I have to," he groaned, and his mouth came down on hers. It was not like the kiss in the cafe. That had been a question, a brand. This was an answer. This was an explosion. It was deep and urgent, his lips moving against hers with a raw, possessive hunger that stole her breath. He tasted of the cold night and a desperate, burning heat. He backed her up, his body a relentless, warm wall, until her legs hit the edge of the kitchen counter. Her breath hitched. His name was a choked sound in her throat, his fingers on her jaw tightened, not painfully, but with a claim that left no room for misunderstanding. He kissed her as if he was starving, a slow, desperate, drowning kiss that made her knees weak. She clung to his shirt, her knuckles white, with a low growl. He broke the kiss. He lifted her, his strength effortless, and sat her on the kitchen counter. She gasped, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. Now they were eye to eye. His pupils were black, his cold mask utterly gone, replaced by a raw, naked need. "You," he rasped, "are not a mistake." He leaned in again, his lips bypassing her mouth. He pressed a hot, open-mouthed kiss to the pulse point on her jaw, then moved lower, his mouth tracing the line of her throat. Lucia's head fell back, her breath catching in a half-sob. She arched into him, a silent, total surrender, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. His lips found the delicate, sensitive skin of her collarbone, and she felt the damp heat of his breath, the light scrape of his stubble. They were both shaking, lost in a whirlwind of emotion, a restrained hunger that was more powerful than any violence. He hadn't touched her. Not really, but he had laid claim to every inch of her. He held her there, his face buried in her neck, breathing her in, and she held him, her small body anchored to his. Both of them, finally, terrifyingly, losing control. The next morning, Lucia woke up tangled in her own sheets, alone. The apartment was silent. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it. Then she saw it, his black overcoat, still draped over the back of her armchair. He had stayed. Not in her bed. He had stayed until she'd fallen asleep, her head on his shoulder, on the sofa. He had carried her to her bed, kissed her forehead, and sat in that chair all night watching her, like a guardian, like a predator. When he emerged from the kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee, she froze. In the bright morning light, in her rumpled sleep clothes, the reality of the night came crashing down. The heat, the desperation, the raw intimacy. He looked at her, his expression calm, watchful. He had taken off his suit jacket. His white shirt was rumpled, the sleeves rolled up his forearms. He looked devastatingly real. "Good morning, Lucia." He offered her a cup. She took it, her hands shaking. "Last night," she stammered, "it was a mistake." His face, which had been open, closed instantly, the cold mask slid back into place. "A mistake. Yes," she said, clutching the mug. I can't, this life, your life, the watching, the violence. I'm not ready for that. I don't want to be a part of it." Dominic set his own mug down on her dresser. He walked to her, his movements calm, deliberate. He stopped a foot away. "You think you have a choice?" His voice was not cruel, just factual. "You think, after last night, after the Morettis, after I put my hands on you, that you can just go back to being a waitress? Go back to dating normal men?" He leaned in, his voice dropping. "You're already in it, Lucia. You have been since the day I first saw you." He picked up his coat, draped it over his arm, and walked to the door. "I have a meeting. I'll have Vince send a car for you. Don't go to the cafe today. Don't go to the bar. Stay here." It wasn't a request. It was an order. "You can't tell me what to do," she said, her voice weak. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked back, and his eyes were dark with a sadness that shocked her. "I'm not telling you. I'm asking you. Stay here." He left. Lucia did not stay. She was angry. She was confused. She felt owned, and she hated it. She spent the morning pacing the apartment. He was wrong. She was not in it. She would not be. She distanced herself. She ignored his texts. She went back to the cafe, acting as if nothing had happened, her politeness a shield of ice. Dominic watched her, his fury a palpable thing in the small shop, but he did not approach her. He let her have her rebellion. It lasted for 3 days. On the 4th day, she was leaving the Astoria in the early afternoon, heading to her night shift. She was angry, defiant, and she was not paying attention. A gray van, one she had never seen before, screeched to a halt at the curb in front of her. 2 men jumped out. They were not Dominic's men, they were rough, their eyes hard. Gino Moretti says hello. One of them snarled and grabbed her arm. Lucia screamed, pure animal terror. She fought, kicking and scratching, but he was too strong. He was dragging her toward the open side door of the van. It happened so fast. A black sedan that had been parked across the street roared to life. Jumping the curb, the man who was always reading a newspaper in the lobby, one of Dominic's guards, burst from the Astoria's front doors. "Let her go!" the guard yelled. The man holding Lucia cursed, shoving her hard toward his partner. "Get her in!" But it was too late. Dominic's guard was on him. A second man, the driver of the black sedan, was out, blocking the van. The sounds were sickening. Shouts, the heavy, wet impact of fists on flesh. Lucia scrambled backward on the pavement, crab-walking away, her heart trying to escape her chest. One of the Moretti men was on the ground. The other one, seeing he was outnumbered, jumped back in the van, which squealed away from the curb, leaving his partner behind. Dominic's guard, Vince, the one from the alley, stood over the groaning man, his breathing heavy. He looked at Lucia, his face grim. "Are you hurt?" "Miss Romero, I don't—" She was sobbing, unable to form words. Vince spoke into his wrist. "It's done. She's safe, but it was Moretti's crew. He broke the truce." He listened, then looked at Lucia. "The boss is on his way." She didn't wait. She ran. She bolted back into the Astoria, past the terrified doorman, and slammed into the elevator, her fingers jabbing the button for her floor. She got into her apartment and threw the deadbolt, sliding to the floor, her entire body shaking. She was in it. He was right. She was in it, and she was going to die. She was still on the floor, crying into her knees. When the pounding began, it wasn't a knock, it was a fist. "Lucia, open this door, now!" It was Dominic's voice, and she had never heard him like this. He was not cold. He was not controlled. He was raw, primal, and terrifying. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn it. The moment it clicked, the door flew open, slamming against the wall. Dominic stood in the doorway. He was drenched, the sky having finally opened up. Rain dripped from his black hair onto his face. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild with a black, bottomless fury. He looked at her, crumpled on the floor, and all the rage seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a desperate, panicked terror. "You could have died," he whispered, his voice cracking. He stormed in, grabbing her by the arms, hauling her to her feet. "You could have died. Why? Why won't you let me protect you?" He wasn't yelling at her. He was yelling at the world, at Moretti, at himself for letting it happen. Lucia broke. The terror, the defiance, the impossible attraction, it all shattered. She collapsed against his chest, her sobs violent and dry. "I'm scared," she wept, her voice muffled against his wet shirt. "I'm so scared. I didn't want to need anyone. I can't be weak." His arms, which had been gripping her with bruising force, suddenly went gentle. The fury evaporated. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, pressing her face into his shoulder. He just held her, his own body trembling with the leftover adrenaline. "Shh," he murmured, his voice low and soothing again. "I've got you. Dijo presa. I've got you." He held her for a long time, right there in the entryway, the rain and the storm outside echoing the one that had just broken inside. He walked her to the sofa and sat, pulling her down with him, never letting her go. They spent the night together. But it was not like the first time. It was not a fire. It was an anchor. He held her. He whispered apologies for scaring her, for bringing this world to her door. She whispered apologies for being so stubborn, for not listening. Later, much later, they moved to the bed. It was slow, it was intimate. It was a silent, desperate communication. His hands on her were reverent. Her touch on his face was questioning. When he kissed her, it was not with hunger, but with a profound, aching tenderness, a promise to keep the world at bay. It was an emotional connection so deep it scared her more than the kidnapping. As she drifted to sleep, safe in his arms, Lucia saw him for the first time. Not the mafia mask, not the cold, granite boss. She saw the man behind it, a man who was lonely, who was terrified of losing her, who was gentle. And as she fell asleep, a cold thought settled in her heart. She was falling in love with him, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she did not belong in his world. And a man like that, in a world like that, could never truly belong in hers. The estate was not a house. It was a fortress of old money, perched on a hill overlooking the river, its stone facade looking cold and judgmental even in the warm autumn twilight. Lucia sat in the passenger seat of Dominic's sedan, the fabric of the dress he'd had sent to her apartment, a simple, elegant sheath of midnight blue silk, feeling alien against her skin. "You are silent," he said, his hand leaving the steering wheel to rest on her knee. His touch was warm, possessive, and the only thing keeping her from vibrating out of her seat. "I'm a waitress. Dominic," she whispered, her voice tight. "You're taking me to this. They're going to hate me." He parked the car in the circular drive, where other vehicles, all of them black and gleaming, were being attended to by valets. He turned to her, his gaze intense in the dim light. "They will not hate you. They will respect you because you are with me. And if they do not," his voice dropped, "they will answer to me." He led her inside, his hand a solid, unmoving weight on the small of her back. The entryway was a cavern of marble and dark. Ancestral oil paintings, the quiet, intense hum of conversation stopped the moment they entered. Everyone stared. Lucia felt 100 pairs of eyes, from men in immaculate suits who looked like harder, older versions of Dominic, and from women draped in pearls and severe black dresses, all landing on her. She felt like an imposter. Her dress was new, but she was not. She was the girl who served them coffee, the girl with the immigrant father and the bad debt. She knew it. They knew it. "Dominic, you are late." A woman with iron gray hair and a face like a clenched fist approached. His aunt. "Aunt Sophia, you look well. This is Lucia Romero." Sophia's eyes raked over Lucia, a dismissive, clinical inspection. "Romero?" She sniffed, as if the name itself smelled bad. "She is with me," Dominic repeated, his voice a quiet command. They were seated at a long, impossibly formal dining table. The clink of silver on porcelain was the loudest sound. Lucia kept her hands in her lap, terrified she would use the wrong fork. She tried to follow Dominic's lead, but she was paralyzed by the scrutiny. It was his cousin, Alessia, who spoke first. She was beautiful, with sharp eyes and a cruel twist to her perfect red lips. She sat across from them, leaning toward Lucia with a smile that was all teeth. "Lucia Romero," Alessia said, her voice carrying across the table. "You work at the cafe downtown, don't you? The Gilded Bean?" Lucia's face burned. She felt Dominic tense beside her. "Yes," Lucia replied, her voice barely a whisper. "How fascinating." Alessia continued, sipping her wine. "My cousin, he brings home a waitress. Tell me, Lucia, did he buy your time for the evening, or are you part of a new charitable outreach program?" The insult hung in the air, sharp and glittering as a shard of glass. Lucia could feel the tears, hot and humiliating, stinging the backs of her eyes before she could even think of a reply. Dominic's voice cut through the silence. It was not loud, but it was so cold, so heavy, that the entire table went still. "Alessia!" His cousin's smile faltered, her face paling. "You will apologize to Miss Romero," Dominic said, his words precise and deadly. "You will show her the respect she is due as my guest, and you will never, ever speak to her that way again. Am I understood?" Alessia looked, for 1 second, like she might argue, but she saw the look in Dominic's eyes, a look Lucia had seen only once before, in the lobby of the Astoria, and her facade crumbled. Yes, cousin, my apologies. Miss Romero, it was a poor joke. Dominic did not acknowledge the apology. He turned his attention back to his plate. The message was clear. The matter was closed. Under the table, out of sight of the prying eyes, his hand found hers, his fingers laced through hers, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, a steady, warm, reassuring pressure. It was a hidden touch, a secret anchor in a cold, hostile sea. He did not look at her, but his grip was her entire world. He was defending her publicly and calming her privately. After the party, a stiff, endless affair of polite silences and whispered Italian she could not understand. They did not go back to the penthouse. Dominic led her down a dark paneled hallway in the estate to his father's old study. The room smelled of old leather, books, and faint, stale cigar smoke. A fire was dying in the massive stone fireplace. It was a room of heavy, masculine power. Lucia stood in the center, feeling the tension of the night rolling off her in waves. She was awful, Lucia whispered, rubbing her arms. She is irrelevant, Dominic said. He was standing by the desk, loosening his tie, his eyes never leaving her. The formal suit, the stiff posture, it all seemed to be at war with the raw intensity in his gaze. You defended me, she said, still processing it. In front of your family. I will always defend you, he said, his voice rough. He pulled the tie from his neck and tossed it on the desk. She walked toward him, drawn by the heat she saw in his eyes, the fear, the humiliation of the dinner. It was all melting away, being replaced by a different, sharper heat. She stopped just before him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, on the stiff, formal fabric of his shirt. They see me as a toy, she murmured, looking down. Your new thing. Let them. He lifted her chin with his finger. I see you. That was all it took. The tension of the night, the stress of the attack, the intimacy of the morning after, it all crested. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not a soft kiss. It was a claiming. He responded instantly, his hands finding her waist, gripping her, pulling her tight against him as his mouth devoured hers. He backed up, sitting on the edge of the massive oak desk, pulling her with him until she was standing between his legs, his hands still locked on her silk-clad hips. Dominic, she breathed, pulling back just enough to look at him. He was breathing heavily, his hair mussed, his eyes black with a desperate, restrained hunger. She made a decision. She, the waitress, the liability, was going to claim him back. She put her hands on his shoulders and, in one fluid motion, hiked her dress up and straddled his lap. He let out a sharp, ragged breath, his hands tightening on her thighs. She was still in her formal dress, he in his suit, but this was more intimate than any nakedness. She was sitting astride his lap, claiming him as her territory in the heart of his family's power. Lucia, he groaned, his voice a prayer. She didn't kiss him. Not yet. She leaned her forehead against his, her fingers going to the buttons of his shirt. He was hard muscle beneath the fine cotton. She undid the first, then the second, her knuckles brushing his warm skin. She slid her hands inside, under the shirt, splaying them wide, and she felt them. Scars. Not one, but several. Old, healed-over ridges in his skin, a long, thin line along his ribs, a star-shaped pucker just above his hip. These were the marks of his life, the marks of the violence he lived with. She traced the largest one, the one on his ribs, with a trembling finger. He flinched, but it was not from pain. A shudder ran through his entire body. You're accepting me, he whispered, his voice full of a raw, broken awe. I am? She whispered back. She traced the scar with her lips. He cried out, his hands tangling in her hair, his grip desperate. She rose up, her dress riding high on her thighs, and looked him in the eye. She was flushed, breathless, her hair coming undone from its neat twist. She slid her hands up his chest, around his neck, and leaned into him, her body pressing against his. He held her, his face buried in her neck, murmuring her name, over and over, like a mantra, a prayer, the only word he knew, The next morning, back in his penthouse, Lucia woke up to the sound of his voice. She was in his bed, the sheets impossibly soft. She smiled, stretching, the memory of the study, the heat, his desperation, her own boldness, making her flush. Then she heard the words. He was in the living room, on the phone. His voice was not the voice that had murmured her name like a prayer. It was the voice from the alley. It was the voice that had confronted Alessia. It was cold, dangerous, and utterly ruthless. "I don't care about his children," Dominic was saying, his voice a low, flat, deadly thing. He broke the truce. He sent his men after her. Find him. Find everything he owns, everything he loves, and burn it to the ground. I want him erased. I want his entire family to disappear. Do you understand me? No survivors. Lucia went cold. She sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to her chest. No survivors. Burn it. Erase him. This was not an exaggeration. This was not a metaphor. This was an order. This was the man she had traced scars on. This was the man who had held her while she slept. He walked back into the bedroom, rubbing the back of his neck, his expression still hard. He saw her, sitting up, her face pale, her eyes wide with a new, fresh terror. The hardness in his face vanished, replaced by the softer look he reserved only for her. "Lucia, what's wrong? Who was that?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp, his jaw tightened. "Business. Business," she repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You told them no survivors." Dominic's face closed. "It was Gino Moretti, the man who tried to have you kidnapped." "So you're going to kill him? And his family? His children?" "I am going to do," Dominic said, his voice hardening, "what is necessary to protect what is mine, to protect you. He came for you, Lucia. This is the only answer he understands." "That's not protection," she cried, scrambling out of the bed, pulling the silk sheet with her, a pathetic shield. That's butchery. That's the man I'm supposed to be afraid of. That's who you are." "It is who I have to be," he roared, his control finally snapping. He advanced on her. "Do you think this is a game? Do you think I can just be normal? This world doesn't allow for weakness. My father was weak, for a moment, and it cost him his life. I will not be weak, and I will not lose you." "You're not losing me," she sobbed. "You are changing me. I'm afraid of losing myself. I'm afraid of becoming the kind of woman who hears her man order a family erased and just goes back to breakfast. I can't be that person. I won't." He stopped, his face a mask of frustration and pain. "I will never hurt you. Lucia, do you hear me? Not you. I don't believe you," she said, "and you say that now, but this life, this poison, it gets in. You can't have this much darkness around you and not have it stain you. I don't believe in happy endings, Dominic. People like me don't get them, and people like you don't give them." She ran into the bathroom and locked the door, her back sliding down the cold marble, her sobs echoing in the huge, empty room. Meanwhile, in a dark, smoky room across the river, Gino Moretti, wounded, furious, and having just been warned by a terrified associate that Dominic Caruso was wiping his assets, looked at a grainy photo of Lucia. He had planned to use her. Now. He had nothing left to lose. He would make Dominic pay. He would take the one thing the man seemed to care about. Lucia stayed in the penthouse for 2 days. She was a ghost. She and Dominic circled each other, their argument a heavy, unspoken thing between them. He was gentle, desperate to get her back. She was polite, distant, and terrified. She saw the truth. He would kill for her. He would erase families for her. And as long as she was with him, he would have to. The Morettis, the Alessias, the entire world would come for her to get to him. She was his weakness, the one crack in his wall. She had to protect him, not from them. She had to protect him from herself. On the 3rd night, he had a meeting, one he said he could not miss. He kissed her at the door, a long, desperate, searching kiss. "Wait for me," he whispered. "We will fix this. I will fix this." She nodded, a lie. The second the door closed, she moved. She did not pack. Packing would be a clue. She went to her old apartment, the one in the Astoria. She found a pen and a piece of paper. Her hands were shaking. "Dominic, You were right. I'm already in it. And it's killing me. But it's killing you, too. They will not stop coming for me to hurt you. I cannot be the reason you spill so much blood. I cannot be the weapon they use to destroy you. I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid for you. This is the only way. Don't find me. Please. L. She left the note on his pillow in the penthouse. She took the emergency cash he kept in a desk drawer, $500, and her coat. She walked out of the building, past the doorman he employed, and disappeared into the night. She went to the main bus station, her heart a cold stone in her chest, and bought a one-way ticket to the first bus leaving. It was headed to a small, anonymous city in the next state. When Dominic returned at 2 a.m, the penthouse was silent. Lucia? He saw the note on the bed. He read it once, twice. The paper crumpled in his fist. The control, the ironclad, steel trap control he had spent a lifetime building, did not just break. It detonated. A roar of pure, animalistic rage tore from his throat. He swept the lamp from the bedside table, shattering it against the wall. He tore the sheets from the bed. When he went to her apartment, the Astoria, and kicked the door in, splintering the frame, and he was looking for a clue, a diary, anything. He found nothing. He overturned the sofa. He smashed the mirror in the bathroom. He tore her closet apart, his hands burying themselves in the clothes she had left behind, his breathing raw and ragged. He got on the phone, his voice a lethal, broken snarl. She's gone. Find her. Vince, you find her now. Call Maria from the cafe. Call her landlord. Put her face on every street camera in this city. I want every man we have on this. She's not gone. She cannot be gone. His men tracked the credit card he had given her, but she hadn't used it. They tracked her phone, but she had left it on the penthouse nightstand. It was Vince who got the break. 3 hours later. Boss. We're checking bus station manifests. A woman matching her description. A cash ticket. Headed north. The bus left 2 hours ago, but it's making a stop at the central station in the storm. It'll be there for another 30 minutes. Dominic didn't answer. He was already in his car, driving himself, tearing through the flooded city streets, the storm outside a pale imitation of the one raging inside him. He burst through the doors of the bus station, a whirlwind of water and fury. The place was fluorescent, cold, and smelled of wet wool and despair. He scanned the sparse crowd, and he saw her. She was not on a bus. She was huddled on a hard plastic bench in the farthest, darkest corner, her knees drawn to her chest, her body shaking. She was soaked. She was shivering. She was weeping into her hands, the picture of a broken, terrified refugee. Lucia looked up, her sixth sense screaming, and she saw him. He was standing there, drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his black overcoat dripping water onto the linoleum. He was not angry. He was not cold. His face was a raw, open wound of desperation and a terrifying, profound relief. She was found. He moved. His long strides devoured the space between them, his wet overcoat flapping around his legs. He didn't slow. He didn't stop. He walked through the stale, fluorescent-lit station like a force of nature, his eyes locked only on her. Lucia scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with the back of her wet, trembling hands. "Dominic, no," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. "Please, don't do this here. Don't make a scene." A few tired travelers, slumped over their bags, looked up, their curiosity piqued by his arrival. "A scene?" he said, his voice a low, ragged sound that was somehow louder than a shout. He was in front of her now, towering over her, his chest heaving. The sheer, animalistic panic in his eyes terrified her. "You ran from me. I had to," she sobbed, backing up until she hit the cold tile wall. "Please, just go. Let me go." "Let you go?" He let out a sound, a bitter, broken laugh that held no humor. "Never." He reached for her, not gently. His hands, hard and desperate, clamped onto her upper arms. He hauled her away from the wall, away from the bench, pulling her directly into his chest. His arms wrapped around her like steel bands, one hand tangling in her wet hair, fisting the strands, holding her head against his shoulder. He crushed her to him, his face burying in her neck, and he just held on. He was shaking. Or maybe she was. She couldn't tell. He was soaking wet, cold from the storm, but his body was a furnace. He was breathing her in, his breath hot and ragged against her skin. It was not a tender embrace. It was an act of possession, an anchor finding the seabed. It was a man who had been drowning, finally finding air. "You're not leaving," he growled into her hair. "You are never leaving me again. You're hurting me," she gasped, her hands trapped between their bodies. He loosened his grip instantly, but only by a fraction. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands moving from her arms to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the rain and tears. His eyes were wild. "Let's go," he commanded. It was not a request. He grabbed her hand, lacing his fingers through hers so tightly she couldn't have pulled away if she'd tried. He dragged her through the station, past the staring travelers, and pushed through the glass doors, back out into the center of the storm. The rain was a solid, freezing sheet of water. It hit them instantly, plastering her thin clothes to her skin. "No!" she screamed, planting her feet on the wet pavement, trying to pull her hand free. You can't just drag me back. I won't go." He turned on her, his face a mask of raw, tormented fury. "You would rather be here, in this, freezing to death in a bus station, running with nothing? That's the life you want? It's a life you can't touch," she cried, the words torn from her, whipped away by the wind. "It's a life where people aren't ordering families to be erased for me. I'm trying to save you. Save me," he roared, pulling her closer. So they were face to face in the deluge. By ripping my heart out, by letting me think, by letting me find you gone. "You don't get it," she shouted back, tears mixing with the rain. "This whole time. You only want me when you're afraid of losing me. You saw me in the cafe for 2 years. Dominic, 2 years, you never saw me. Not until I was in trouble. Not until another man looked at me. You only want me when someone else might take me, or when I try to run. I'm not a person to you. I'm a prize, a thing you have to keep." The accusation, raw and true, struck him. He flinched, his grip on her hand faltering for a second. "That's not true," he said, his voice a low, pained snarl. "It is true. You want to protect me. You want to save me. But what happens when I'm saved? What happens when I'm just there? When I'm not a project? Will you even see me then? Will you get bored? Will you look for the next broken thing to fix?" He stared at her, the rain streaming down his face, his dark hair plastered to his skull. He saw her, not as a prize, not as a project, but as a terrified woman who believed, to her very core, that she was unlovable unless she was a victim. His expression, the wild, angry, desperate one, finally broke. It crumbled, leaving behind a raw, devastating vulnerability, a pain that mirrored her own. He reached out, his hand gentle this time, and cupped her freezing cheek. "I want you," he said, his voice so low, so rough, she barely heard it over the storm. "I want you when you are running. I want you when you are fighting. I want you when you are weeping in a bus station. And I want you when you are smiling behind a counter." He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers, their breath mingling in a cloud of steam. "I want you even when you try to run, especially then, because it means I get to find you." She searched his eyes, desperate to find the lie. She found only a terrifying, bottomless sincerity. "I'm so cold," she whispered, the fight finally leaving her, her body slumping. "I know," he said. "Ti prego, come home with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He swept his arm under her knees, lifting her effortlessly from the ground. Lucia let out a small, broken cry, but didn't fight. She was too cold, too tired, too defeated by the truth in his eyes. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his wet, cold coat, and let herself be carried. He carried her to his car, which was idling at the curb, its engine a low growl. Vince was in the driver's seat. He didn't look back, just unlocked the doors. Dominic put her in the back, sliding in beside her, and wrapped her in a heavy wool blanket that had been waiting on the seat. He never let go of her hand, "Take us home, Vince," Dominic said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. The penthouse. The drive was silent. Lucia shivered under the blanket, the car's heater blasting. But the cold was in her bones. She watched the city lights smear by through the rain-streaked glass. She looked at the man beside her. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight, his free hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist on his knee. He looked like a man who had just walked back from the edge of a cliff. He led her into the penthouse. It was silent, dark, the only light coming from the wall of windows. The city's glow filtered through the driving rain. "Go," Dominic said to Vince, who had followed them up. "Go home. Get some sleep." "Oh, boss, Moretti will be ashes by morning," Dominic said, his voice flat. "But for tonight, go." Vince nodded, his gaze flicking to Lucia, full of a pity she hated. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the vast, quiet space. Dominic turned on a single, low-watt lamp, casting the room in a soft, warm glow. He shrugged off his soaking overcoat, tossing it onto a chair. Lucia had been here before, but she had never seen it. She had been a guest, a prisoner, an argument. Now, in the quiet, she saw him. The space was immaculate, cold, all glass and steel and black leather, but on the shelves, tucked away, were things she hadn't noticed. On a side table, there was not one, but 3 framed photographs. She moved closer, her blanket trailing. It was a woman, the same woman at different ages. She was beautiful, with dark, laughing eyes and a smile so bright it hurt. In one, she was holding a small boy with Dominic's serious eyes. In another, she was younger, her arms around a man who looked like Dominic, but smiled. "My mother," he said, his voice soft behind her. He had shed his suit jacket and was unbuttoning his damp cuffs. "She's beautiful," Lucia whispered, touching the silver frame. "She was," he said. "She died when I was 19. Cancer. She was the light in this family. After she was gone, my father..." He trailed off. "He became the man I told you about." Lucia looked around. This massive, empty, perfect apartment. There were no other photos, no clutter, no magazines, no stray mail, no sign that anyone lived here. It was a museum of a lonely life. This was his real cage. "There's nothing of you here," she said. "There was nothing I wanted to put on display," he said. He walked to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her, brandy. She took a sip, the fire warming her, chasing the last of the chill. They sat, not on the cold leather sofas, but on the thick rug in front of the windows, the storm raging on the other side of the glass. They talked. He didn't ask her why she ran again. He seemed to understand. Instead, he asked her about her father, about the jobs, about what she wanted before her life had been derailed by debt, and she told him. Then she found the courage to ask. "Dominic," she said, her voice small, "I'm in love with you." He went utterly still. He had been staring into the rain, but his head snapped toward her. His eyes, dark and endless, were full of a sudden, sharp hope. "I am," she continued, the words tumbling out. "I think I have been for a long time. That's why I'm so scared." "You don't need to be scared of me. Lucia, I told you." "I know," she interrupted. "I know you won't hurt me. That's not what I'm afraid of." She looked down at the glass in her hands. "I'm afraid you'll get tired of me. I'm afraid that the only reason you want me is because I'm a mess, because I'm a rescue. You're a king. Dominic, you run this city, you're powerful, and I'm just me. What happens when I'm not scared anymore? What happens when I'm just here? Will you still..." She couldn't finish. The fear of it, the insecurity. It was choking her. He set his glass down. He moved in front of her, taking her glass from her hands and took her face between his palms. His expression was not one of pity. It was one of almost anger. A fierce, protective anger. "Do you really believe that?" he whispered, his voice raw. "Do you really think you are so uninteresting that I would need you to be broken to love you?" I have never," he said, His words precise, deliberate. "Looked at another woman, not since the day you smiled." She blinked, confused. "What? What day?" "It was a Tuesday," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "2, maybe 3 years ago. It was raining. You were working. That old woman, Mrs. Petrova. She was short 50 cents for her coffee. You waved her off, but she was embarrassed. So you pretended to spill the sugar. You made a mess. You laughed, and you said, 'See, now we're even. My mess is bigger than yours.' And you smiled at her. A real smile." Lucia stared at him, her heart stopping. She didn't even remember that. "I was in my corner," he said, his thumb stroking her cheekbones. "I was reading about a stock merger, and I looked up, and you were light. You were everything that wasn't in my world, and I was lost. I have been lost, on you, ever since." He continued, "I didn't talk to you because I'm a coward. Lucia, I'm the man who orders families erased, and I was terrified to ask you for a date, because I knew that if I let you in, if you said no, and I knew that if you said yes, I would never be able to let you go. I am not the one who needs you broken. You are the one who is saving me from being this." He gestured to the cold, empty room. The tears that came now were not from fear. They were from relief, a profound, soul-deep relief. He saw the change in her. He saw the trust. That night, they made love. It was not like the desperate, frantic passion in the kitchen. It was not the angry, claiming heat in the study. This was a choice. She was the one who leaned in and kissed him. She was the one who took his hand and led him from the living room into the soft, quiet darkness of his bedroom. She was the one who pushed the damp shirt from his shoulders, her hands not trembling as they rediscovered his scars. This time, she took control. She laid him back against the pillows, and she explored him, not with the frantic energy of before, but with a slow, deliberate tenderness. She guided his hands, showing him with her touch that she was not afraid, that she trusted him. She kissed his jaw, his throat, the scars on his chest, each one a promise. Dominic was undone. He was, for the first time in his life, utterly pliant. He was gentle. He was reverent. His touch on her skin was a question, a plea. He whispered to her, not in English, but in the low, liquid Italian of his mother, words she didn't understand but felt in her soul. Amore mio, loose, mia unica, my love, light, my only one. He held her as if she were the only real thing in his world, the only thing keeping him from drifting away into the darkness. He held her as if she were made of spun glass, and at the same time, as if she were his only anchor. It was a slow, profound, emotional collision, a healing, later. As they lay tangled in the sheets, the storm outside finally exhausted. His promise was a rumble against her ear. "I will keep you safe," he whispered, his lips against her temple as she drifted to sleep in his arms. "No matter the cost, no one will ever touch you again." The next morning, Lucia woke to the sound of screaming. Not a person, the scream of sirens, dozens of them wailing in the street far below. She sat up, clutching the sheet. Dominic was already at the window, pulling on his pants, his back rigid. "What is it?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Stay there," he said. His phone, on the nightstand, was buzzing, a frantic, angry sound. He snatched it up. "What?" He listened, his face going from confusion to a cold, hard, white fury. "Where? How many?" Lucia got out of bed, pulling on his shirt from the night before. "Dominic, you're scaring me." He held up a hand, silencing her. He listened for another 30 seconds, his entire body going still. "They didn't hit the penthouse," he said, his voice flat, dead. He ended the call, his hand slowly lowering. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of the man who had whispered to her in Italian. They were the eyes of the boss. They were the eyes of a killer. "That was Vince," he said, his voice a block of ice. There was an explosion. On the street below, a car bomb. A car bomb? Was it Moretti? Were they trying to hit you? Dominic looked at her, his expression something she had never seen before, a cold, abject terror. They weren't trying to hit me. Lucia, the bomb was in your car. My car? I don't have a car. The one I assigned to you, he clarified, his voice rough. The one I had waiting for you in the garage, in case you wanted to be normal. It was parked in front of my headquarters. I don't understand, she whispered. They didn't know you were here, he said, the realization dawning on him, horrifying him. They thought you were going to work. They thought you were back at the cafe. The bomb was timed for 8:30 a.m., when you would have been getting in. He walked toward her, the truth settling over them like a shroud. They weren't targeting me, he said, his voice finally breaking. Lucia, they were targeting you. The safe house was a sterile, high-rise apartment with bulletproof windows and a view of a bridge. It was silent, clean, and felt more like a luxurious prison than a refuge. Dominic had kissed her, his face a hard mask of controlled fury, and left her with 2 guards who stood outside her locked door. He was preparing for war. She heard them on the phone, his men. The words were clipped, cold. Assets moving, containment, and neutralizing threats. They were sweeping the city, cleaning up the mess Gino Moretti had made, and protecting everyone who had ever been associated with the Caruso name. Lucia paced the thick beige carpet. She thought of the car bomb. She thought of the casual, brutal way Dominic had ordered a family erased. And then she thought of Mrs. Petrova, the old woman from the cafe, the one she'd given her sandwich to, the one she'd made laugh by spilling sugar. The one Dominic remembered, Mrs. Petrova lived in a small 3rd-floor apartment in a neighborhood that was now, effectively, a war zone between the Moretti and Caruso crews. She was an asset, a peripheral contact. Would Dominic's men, in their ruthless efficiency, get to her? Would they be gentle? Or would they just move her? Or worse, would Moretti's men, desperate and cornered, look for the weakest link, the old woman who was known to be friendly with Dominic Caruso's new girl? Lucia felt a cold sickness in her stomach. She had been the one to smile at Mrs. Petrova. She had been the one to bring her to Dominic's attention. She had inadvertently painted a target on the old woman's back. She would not be the kind of woman who waited in a safe house while someone else paid the price. She waited until the guard change at 4 a.m. She found a fire exit at the end of the hall. She was, after all, the girl who had run from a mafia boss. His own guards were no match for her desperation. She left the safe house, a ghost in the pre-dawn dark, and took the service stairs 22 flights down. The kidnapping was brutally, almost pathetically, simple. She made it to Mrs. Petrova's neighborhood. She was 2 blocks from the apartment building when a dark van slid to the curb. She didn't even have time to scream. The door slid open and a hand clamped over her mouth. She was bundled inside, the smell of oil and fear filling her lungs. They did not speak to her. They drove for what felt like an hour, ending in a cold, damp warehouse that smelled of the river and rotting fish. A man was waiting. Gino Moretti. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his arm in a crude sling. He was a cornered rat, and he had just found the last piece of cheese. So, he rasped, circling her as his men tied her to a simple metal chair. The prince's little bird. He took everything from me. My business, my family. All for you. He backhanded her. The blow was sharp, metallic, and sent a spike of pain through her jaw. Now, we see what he's willing to trade. He pulled out a phone, opened a video app, and propped it on a crate. He hit record. Smile, little bird, he spat. You're live. Dominic was in his war room, a converted study in his penthouse, the city lights a cold, distant backdrop. He had not slept in 2 days. He was running on pure, black, undiluted rage. We've neutralized 3 of his safe houses, Vince said, pointing to a map. His main accounts are frozen. He's got nowhere left to... A laptop was pushed onto the table. A text message. An unknown link. Boss, Vince said, his voice tight. You need to see this. Dominic clicked the link. The feed was grainy, the audio poor, but it was her, Lucia, tied to a chair, her hair a mess, her lips split and bleeding. She was terrified, her eyes wide and staring, not at the camera, but at something just off screen. Gino Moretti stepped into the frame, his face a mask of triumphant hate. The sound in the war room, the hum of computers, the quiet voices, it all stopped. Dominic Caruso did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched, his face going from the hard, cold mask of a boss to something empty, a void. The calm at the absolute center of a hurricane. "He's at the old Red Hook cannery," Dominic said, his voice a dead, quiet whisper. "The one his grandfather owned." Vince looked at him, stunned. "How do you—" "The brickwork. It's pre-war. And the rust pattern on that girder." He pointed to a shape in the background. "He thinks it's his last stronghold. He thinks he's smart." He closed the laptop. He stood up and walked to a locked cabinet. He opened it. Inside were not files, but weapons. He did not reach for them. He simply checked his own shoulder holster, the one he had not worn in years. He turned to his men. His eyes were not angry. They were not human. They were the flat, dead eyes of an executioner. "He sent this," Dominic said, his voice a soft, lethal razor. "Because he thinks he has leverage. He thinks he can negotiate." He walked to the door. "Vince, you take 5 men. You lock down the perimeter. No one gets out. The rest of you, you're with me." "Boss," Vince said, his voice urgent. "We should call the police. Make it look—" "No," Dominic said. "No police. No witnesses. This is not business. This is pest control." The rescue was not a battle. It was a storm. They hit the cannery from 2 sides. There were no negotiations. There were no warnings. Dominic's men moved with a precision that was terrifying. The action was swift, brutal, and muffled by the heavy brick walls. Dominic did not participate in the firefight. He moved through it. He walked through the chaos, untouched, a man with a singular, unholy purpose. He was not there to win a fight. He was there to retrieve his property. He was there to end a bloodline. He found her in a small, cold office in the back. The man who had hurt her, the one who had stayed behind to guard her, was standing over her, a knife in his hand. "That's far enough, Caruso!" the man yelled, his voice cracking with fear as he grabbed Lucia by the hair, pulling her head back. "One more step and I'll—" Dominic shot him. The sound was deafening in the small room. He shot him twice, not with anger but with the cold, bored efficiency of a man swatting a fly. The man crumpled. Lucia fell forward, sobbing, the chair toppling over. Dominic was at her side in an instant, his hands cutting the ropes at her wrists and ankles. He hauled her to her feet, his hands all over her, checking for wounds, his eyes wild and frantic. "Are you hurt? Did he... No, she sobbed, collapsing against him. "Just my face, Dominic." "It's okay," he whispered, his voice thick, his arms crushing her. "I'm here. Tiho presa. I've got you." He was still holding her when Gino Moretti stumbled in, bleeding from a wound in his side, his gun raised. You think you've won?" Moretti panted, his face a mask of sweat and blood. She's your poison. Caruso. She'll be the death of you." Dominic turned, shielding Lucia with his body. He looked at the man who had dared to put a hand on her. He looked at the man who had made her bleed. He moved past Lucia, his eyes fixed on Moretti. He was unarmed, his own gun on the floor. It didn't matter. "Gino," Dominic said, his voice a low, placid growl. He put his hands on the man who had hurt her. His hands, which had been so gentle, so reverent, were now weapons. There was no struggle. There was no fight. There was just a terrible, final pressure, a sickening, final sound of cartilage and bone. He let the body fall to the floor like a sack of garbage. He did not look at the man again. He turned back to Lucia, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with terror and a new, terrible understanding. He was covered in blood. Theirs. It was on his suit, on his hands, on his face. He was the monster. He was the man she had been warned about. He walked to her. his face a mask of pain and self-loathing. He bent down and scooped her into his arms, as he had at the bus station. He carried her out of that building, through the chaos, through the arriving sirens of the police Vince had finally called. He carried her out into the cold, clean night air, and he did not look back. "Never again," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "Never again." Lucia woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the quiet, steady beep of a heart monitor. The light in the room was a soft gray, filtered by closed blinds. She was in a hospital. Her body ached, but the throbbing in her jaw had subsided to a dull pulse. She turned her head. He was there. He was not in the bed. He was slumped in the hard, plastic visitor's chair, his head lolled back at an awkward angle. He was still in his suit, now rumpled and stained. A dark, 3-day stubble covered his jaw. His hands, scrubbed clean, were resting on his knees, his brow furrowed in a deep, troubled sleep. He looked exhausted. He looked broken. He looked, she thought, utterly beautiful. A nurse's chart at the foot of the bed said she had been here for 2 days. He'd been in that chair for 2 days. She reached out her hand, her fingers trembling. She brushed them against the rough stubble on his cheek. His eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of the killer. They were not the eyes of the boss. They were Dominic's. They were wide, confused, and then, seeing her, flooded with a relief so profound it was painful. "Lucia," he rasped, his voice a dry croak. He surged forward, grabbing her hand, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing her bruised cheekbone. You're awake." Tears, hot and immediate, welled in her eyes. They spilled over, tracing a path to his fingers. She saw the monster in the warehouse. She saw the blood. She saw the man who had just ordered a war, all for her. And she saw the man sleeping in a chair, terrified of losing her. "You still want someone like me?" she whispered, the question a raw, broken thing. "After all this? After what I caused? After what you had to do?" He stared at her, his expression shattering. He looked confused. He looked as if she had just spoken in a language he couldn't comprehend. "Want you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. "Lucia, He let out a shaky breath, his eyes closing. "You're all I've ever wanted." The final romantic scene happened on a quiet, cold morning, 1 week later. They stood on the rooftop of his penthouse, the city waking up below them, a river of white and red lights in the gray dawn. She was healed, mostly. A faint yellow-purple bruise was all that remained on her jaw. Dominic stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her. He was in a simple black shirt, and he had put his heavy wool overcoat around her shoulders. It swamped her, smelling of him, of safety, of home. "It's quiet," she murmured, leaning her head back against his chest. "It is," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Moretti is gone. His crew is dismantled. It's over." "For now," she said. "Forever," he corrected. He kissed her forehead, a long, gentle press of his lips. I'm changing things. I'm selling the assets my father loved, the shipping, the other things. I'm keeping the real estate. I'm going legitimate." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Dominic, you don't have to—" "I know," he said, stopping her. "I have to, because I want to sleep, because I want to wake up with you, in a world that isn't on fire, because you're all I've ever wanted." Their fingers laced together, and Lucia, for the first time in her life, smiled. It was not the tired, polite smile of a waitress. It was not the terrified, broken smile of a victim. It was a real smile, full of light, and it was all for him. She was not invisible. She was not afraid. The end of the story was, in fact, a beginning. It happened a month later, at the city's annual hospital charity gala. The room was a sea of old money and flashing cameras, the same crowd that had been at the estate, the same women with pearl necklaces and cruel, judging eyes. Dominic Caruso walked in, and as always, the room hushed. But this time, he was not alone. He walked in with Lucia Romero on his arm. She was not in a borrowed dress. She was in a gown of emerald green that matched the fire in her eyes. She was not walking behind him. She was at his side. Alessia, his cousin, looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. An old, powerful man, a rival of his father's, approached. "Dominic, I see you brought a guest." Dominic stopped. He looked at the man, then at the room, which was watching. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. He turned to Lucia, his eyes full of a love so bright it eclipsed everyone. "She is not my guest," Dominic said, his voice clear and carrying. He brought her hand, the one laced with his, to his lips. "This is Lucia Romero, the woman I love." He ignored the shocked, indrawn breaths. He ignored the whispers and the stares. He only looked at her. And for the first time, in that room of cold, hard power, they were not looking at a waitress. They were not looking at a liability. They were looking at Lucia. Because now, finally, the world saw her too. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Lucia and Dominic. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments. If you love stories like this, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. And finally, please share your thoughts. What was your favorite part? What did you feel? Let me know in English. I read every comment. Thank you again.